Move approval.
Okay, first and a second, any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Abstained? Okay, motion carries. Item, set and vote contracts and expenses. Todd and Dylan? Again?
Yeah, thank you. Got two items for you. One expense, which is just our annual NARC membership, which we budget for every year. That's $32.50. That's based on the size of the metro area. That's how that fee is derived. And then for a contract, we've talked to you over the last several months about the MIPA and MPO contract. This would be for receiving funds from MIPA and helping with the kind of backroom functions and some planning activities contracted as well. So for the fourth quarter of this fiscal year, a little over $15,000 in money coming into the MPO. And then for fiscal year 2023, roughly $61,000 for those services. As I mentioned, this is an arrangement we've been discussing for a long time, a partnership with MIPA. We're working with them to hire one employee. We'll cover the MIPA's needs as far as providing that support for that employee, handling their benefits, payroll, that type of thing. Next slide. We got another slide, or is it hung up? There we go. So I'll supervise the employee. As I mentioned, we'll do the human resources, payroll, benefits, accounting, auditing. That's included in those amounts that I mentioned before. Also provide some planning support as needed to give some broader expertise to the MIPA area and help with some public engagement as well. Next slide. Oh, went too far. So the total for, as I mentioned, for the next fiscal year is $61,000. That's indirect costs for office space, phones, that type of thing, computers. $15,000 for the planning staff support, audit fees in there, and then the admin fee for working on the benefits and oversight and those type of functions. We would recommend approval on these two items. Be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Todd?
Move approval. No, go ahead if you got a question.
How long is the contract for? It's just a 1 year.
Well, MIPA has a 3-year contract with the feds. This contract doesn't have an end date per se, but it would mirror the federal contract.
The contract is ongoing. It says that we will, when we do our budgets each year, that's when we'll determine the rate that we'll charge MIPA each year. So
Right.
Move approval.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say same. Okay, motion passed. And I skip right over item 3, approval of the meeting minutes for the March 9th, 2022 meeting. David, any comments, questions, changes?
Move approval.
Okay, motion second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same. Okay, motion passes. Item 5, report and vote, May executive committee meeting date. Todd.
Yeah, thank you. When we set the meeting dates for exec last year, we knew this could be a potential conflict, but not knowing whether they would do the partnership would do their May DC trip, we scheduled it for May 10th, or conflicts with the DC trips, and May 11th, excuse me. So we've got a few options to change that date. So we work around the DC trip. So Tuesday, May 11th, the day before, that could be a busy day for some people trying to wrap up things, but at the same time, 11:30, push it back a week to May 18th at 11:30 and keep the policy meeting on May 19th. Or again, do Wednesday, May 18th, and then move the policy meeting back to May 26th. We've done a kind of a combination of those in the past. So it's really up to your preference.
Hey Todd, is there any reason why staff would benefit from having the extra week between the policy or between executive policy? Would you need that extra week?
We don't typically need it. I mean, it depends. Sometimes if there's something asked that we need to research, but typically, no, Ted, we don't.
I mean, in my mind, it'd be better just keep policy on the same day because everyone has that on the calendar.
Yeah.
And just do exec on the 18th if you don't have a need for it.
Or on the
No, I
10th.
don't see any issue with it, especially this coming month.
How many is going to DC? Is everybody here going to DC?
So there's one suggestion to do both on the 18th. Anybody favor of a different date? I can't make the 10th, so I would vote for the 18th.
Okay.
I can't make the 10th either.
Okay.
Okay, so motion to change to Wednesday, May 18th at 11:30 and keep policy meeting on May 19th. A motion for that? Motion.
Second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Great. Motion carries. Number 6.
All right, thank you, Stephanie. Cool, I'm sorry I'm late. Item 6, report bulletin for the fiscal year 2026 surface transportation. Thank you. So we got our target for DOT probably into February or so. This year, we're going to have a little over $50 million available in SPG funding. This is a little bit of an increase over what we've had the past 5 or 6 years or so, close to almost a $2 million increase in SPG funding. So we were excited to see that we got that increase, especially with all the projects we had this year. It was a tough year for the funding subcommittee to decide who to award funding to. As you can see, our requests for this year were right at $32 million. So again, nothing close to what the requests were. So the recommendation, the funding subcommittee met on February 24th and developed the following recommendation. There's a list in your agenda packet, but I'll run through each one of them. The recommended $1.1 million to Anthony's First Street widening project, $1 million to Clive's Interstate 35, Interstate 80 interchange. Grimes are recommending $500,000 for their southeast 37th Street. Waukee Allison's Road, $750,000, and then the West Des Moines Hillside Parkway, $1.1 million. Again, this is for the system capacity category. Under the major reconstruction replacement, they recommended that Altoon's 8th Street project receive $750,000. Douglas Avenue corridor, $2.2 million. Fort County, Northeast 23rd Avenue, $1.5 million. And then Windsor Heights, 73rd Street, phase 1, $750,000. There was one system optimization project that was submitted, and the committee recommended that it receive City of Moines Intelligent Transportation System, which received $1.5 million. We had 2 bridge projects that were recommended to receive funding. One for the City of Des Moines University Avenue Bridge, $1.7 million, and then Polk County's bridge replacement, $500,000. In addition to that, DART's project is recommended to receive $1.4 million, and then our traditional award to the MPO for our TMA program of $95,000. If you look on the screen here, we've got a table that shows kind of what the breakout is as far as how we're doing in our categories. You'll recall that as part of our long range plan, we wanted to hit certain targets for each one of these categories. As you can see, kind of shoot that. Percentages there. On the system capacity, we try to stay between 0 and 30% of the funds awarded to that category. And as you can see, we're right at 30%. I'll say that's the closest we've ever gotten to that target in this category. Typically, we end up awarding more funding in that category. So we're excited to see that. Picture reconstruction replacement. Again, we're right within the ranges that we set there. We had that minimum target of 25, and we're over that minimum target at 34%. System optimization is one that's a little bit down this year. Typically, we get a little closer to that. But really, the reason for that is just because of all the projects we had, we weren't able to fully award that project. We only had the one project submitted that category. So the committee felt pretty comfortable with the fact that we weren't quite hitting that target. Similar situation with the bridge projects this year. We didn't quite have as much requests as we typically do. And then with all the other projects, we just weren't able to quite hit that bridge target. However, in the past, we have been doing really well to hit that 20%. So again, the committee wasn't super concerned about that. And then transit, we're just slightly under what that request is for the 10%, but it is more funding than we've actually given the DART in a number of years. So the funding amount is more, just off on the percentage. So overall, really happy with how this recommendation forward. Again, it's in your agenda packet, and for your approval today. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them. I guess the one note I would make is there was quite a bit of discussion at the funding subcommittee meeting regarding the scoring system and just whether or not it really is aligning with the priorities and the way the funding subcommittee is awarding funding. And so they did request that we kind of go back and look at our scoring system, do a little bit of a review and audit of it, to see if there's anything else we could do to kind of help bring those things more in line. And then in addition to that, there also was some discussion about just big projects, projects that are 30, 40, $50 million coming in when they're making requests for several $1 million. Does it make sense to push money towards those projects when there's such a big total project cost on them? And so I think that's something that we'll probably continue to discuss. I don't know if we didn't really come up with any good answers to that, but I think it is something that will continue to be a discussion point at future funding subcommittee meetings. And I don't know, Ruth or Bob, if you have any further comments on that, being on that committee.
No, it's not a reflection that we don't want those big projects to happen. How do we best move them along? This is the.
Yeah.
So, question. Talk to me about the scoring and how you're awarding projects, and because it just seems somewhat inconsistent when
I have the same question. They're not aligned, right?
yeah, there's nothing. I mean, when you get a project that scores, 100 or 99, and then you get a project that scores 26.
Right.
I mean, you're not even funding the project that scored. And is it 99 out of 100? Is that what the maximum number you can get on scoring?
The way the scoring system is now, you can actually score a little bit higher than 100.
Okay. But I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, that looks like the second highest on this chart, scoring wise.
Yeah.
And it was given 0. And so it sticks out like a sore thumb. And not just because it's Des Moines,
Right.
but
I had the same question.
it sticks out horribly.
But I think too, Joe, honestly too, I think, Scott kind of directed this being, Des Moines we always try to get Des Moines certain amount of funding every year.
So last year we got 41%. This year we got 37%. And I know it's close,
I know, yeah,
but I mean, that's not consistent either.
well, we try to, there's a combination of trying to do some rough justice on what percentages should be. And then also with the projects that Des Moines does get, I think Scott has some input as far as where to direct them to too. So I think we had that discussion is that the scoring certainly is something that we look at, but at the end of the day, the projects have to fit right, and the cities have the input. If they are going to get some funds, what projects they go to.
So why are we scoring anything then?
I think it's a guideline. It helps provide some guidelines for discussion. Same token, for years and years, the scoring has never been a direct relationship to what the awards are either.
I think it's been a little bit more consistent than what it is now. And we went through the scoring process at length, changing it back over the last few years and trying to get a balance of how we're going to, spend money in different types of areas. And we've had that discussion. I mean, for the last 4 years at least. And so, I mean, your comment was we're going to go back and change the scoring again.
I don't know if we're going to change it, Joe. I think we're just going to have that discussion. That
Okay.
discussion came up at the meeting, and so it's always a matter that we always try to improve things and look at things. But at least have that discussion. I understand your point. We had that exact discussion with the committee meeting, and but then also the discussion was the counterpoint is you try to have overall some rough justice overall and try to get some big projects done, and certain jurisdictions are going to get certain monies. They generally have some say on where those dollars can be directed.
Yeah, and I'm, like I said, I'm not complaining. I'm looking to see consistency when, anyone looks at this, they're saying, oh, okay, well, yeah, we scored this and we're looking at it, but Bob, there's no
I
consistency.
understand. I don't
There's no
deny that.
consistency
I don't
with
deny
this. So you could enter a project and, it just seems like we're gonna roll the dice and see if we're gonna get it. Okay, well, maybe that one, it scored really high, but you're getting money for some other projects and this just isn't Des Moines. This is all communities.
And maybe some part of that discussion is, what do you city say as a priority? I mean, I think we need to keep the city's flexibility for saying, we have two projects, one scores higher than the other one, but the city should be able to say, we really got to get this other one done.
Yeah.
Just because of the benefits to the transportation system in our community. So I would hate to take that away, but somehow we need to acknowledge that there is a priority, maybe just acknowledge that there is a priority system per cities that have multiple projects.
I completely, and I'm not arguing to get money for the hip road rehabilitation. Don't take it that way. That's not, that is not what this
But on
discussion is
paper,
about.
the perception is.
Exactly. On paper, it looks like that we're not being consistent with scoring. So that's why I said, for the scoring out, if we're not going to, if we're not going to use it as a consistent basis, we've spent hours in meetings talking about how we're going to change the scoring so it fits right. And if we're not going to use it, if we're only going to use it as a guide mark, okay, well, and then we're just going to enter our priorities as a city. We can do that without any scoring. Probably save staff a lot of time.
I do think it does provide valuable input. I don't think it goes completely overlooked, Joe. But I think true, you make a point that at the end of the day, it doesn't directly correlate
The
with
whole,
what's awarded. I agree.
Mark has a project that scored 26. He's getting, over half of it funded. And, or Russ, I should say, in West Des Moines.
This is 49.
Yeah.
I think that's why we always have the discussion, but I think that's been the history of this from as long as I've been on this. I've been on it for quite a while. So there's no ever any direct correlation between scoring and funding, but it does provide a benchmark and some guidelines. And I think I certainly, when I look to make my recommendations and thoughts.
Then one of the things also is, with the scoring system, we've tweaked it over the last year. And I think some of the communities, when they were filling out the information for the application, didn't quite understand how, when they selected certain check boxes, how that affected the point totals. And so West Des Moines, case in point, I think would have probably filled it out a little differently if they had another chance at it, and it would have raised the point level that they got. So we're going to do some education with the staff on how the application itself works, plus look at just, is it doing what we want it to do?
Well, it doesn't sound like that we're taking even the check marks into consideration. It's the projects, Todd. So it doesn't matter what they're checking. They didn't check the check marks, but they got over 50% of the project funded. So that argument doesn't sit well with me in any way. That doesn't make any sense. Well, if they would have checked it differently, they would have scored more points. Well, what does that mean? They would have got more money?
I don't know if they would have gotten more
than
money.
50%?
I don't know if they would have gotten more money, but it would have shown that the project had a higher point total than the 25 or 26 that it got.
I also think the scoring just in itself proves that we're bidding the projects.
Yes.
At some point, you just have to show that you're going through a bidding process instead of just saying, okay, you want that project? Okay, at least we've taken the time to bid it.
Also the federal guidelines require us to go through a competitive process, and they don't dictate what that process has to look like, but they do highly encourage that you're using the goals and performance measures of the long-range plan to get to that competitive process. So I feel like if we move away from scoring at all, or completely.
Let's hope they don't look at that scoring then, because that's really inconsistent, and they would probably look at it and say, what are you guys doing? If you're gonna say, I mean, to me, saying that argument is even worse because, I mean, we're scoring things and the lowest score is getting more money than the highest score. And the highest score, one of the higher scores is getting 0. So, I mean, I think the federal highway would look at that and say, well, that's very inconsistent. How are you guys using your scoring?
Well, again,
That's just my input. I know it's not going to change anything, but I think we need to come up with some type of consistency going forward. And it has been a little bit more consistent over the last few years. There hasn't been this big swing like we got it. And I understand Scott's on there and I get it.
and Des Moines certainly had some input on that. So
I-
that's how it ended up as far as the project that Des Moines was awarded and where the dollars went.
I will say, based on the mix of projects and the amount of requests we've had this year, I think in my time at MPO, this is probably one of the most difficult years, I think, for the funding subsidy to come up with their recommendation. I think they really had to think hard this year. Some years have been easier. I think this is probably one of the hardest years for my observation.
Frankly,
I mean, we got more dollars in the pot, not a lot. And as far as the people that I represent and the people that the mayor represents, we got less money coming to us. And we had one of the projects score the highest. So I've got to go back and explain that to our constituents, even though this isn't my ward. As an elected official, that doesn't look right.
Well, as Bob mentioned, I think when we did the first round of funding for this, we did award some funding to the Hickman Road rehabilitation. But as Bob mentioned, Scott asked us to move that funding to a different project to help finish, I think, the Douglas Avenue project.
I'm literally fine not doing Hickman Road. That is not what this is about, but it is about being consistent. And you know, others are going to fall into that category later. You know, it just shows blatantly that we're not looking at the scoring.
I think we are looking at the scoring.
Okay.
I disagree. I respectfully disagree on that.
All
And
right.
frankly, you know, when you talk about percentages, then you are also saying that Des Moines should get a certain percentage every year. And that means we should disregard the scoring if we're going to just automatically give a certain percentage to Des Moines. I think, yes, it is a little bit
I
less.
think
this
that based on population, yeah, we should get a percentage.
And you frankly, some years you've gotten more too. And we've tried to push more things to Des Moines every year. So
Depending on the project and depending on the regional benefit of it, I'm sure we have gotten
Yeah.
better,
so
more. And so is other communities. So we're not going to get into that pissing match
no,
here.
but I guess my whole point, Joe, is that it's a combination of scoring. When you say we should only look at the scoring, then that means Des Moines some years may get very little, frankly, you know, or very, not based on the percentage. I think it's a combination of scoring and looking at that, and also somewhat of a rough justice over the years. You know, there are some years that I'd like to certainly get more project money for my projects in my city, but we get less. And you know, certainly this
I
year
respect
that Des
that.
Moines certainly got a little bit less than maybe on a percentage basis they did. But over time, we do a combination of rough justice and you know, priorities on critical projects. And I truly think, you know, at least from my perspective and how I look at it and the decisions I make is that you have to combine both of those. And it doesn't always directly correlate. You can't always directly correlate.
I don't think I, as a member, if a representative for a city expresses a priority when we come to funding, I don't think I want to be in the position of questioning that as far as local control, simply because I don't want to tell a city, nope, you got to take the money for this project because it's scored high.
I understand
I
that.
don't want to get into
No,
that discussion.
And I'm sure Scott played a role in directing funding because we have a certain amount of funding. And I know Polk County's working with us on Douglas Avenue corridor. So, I mean, I do understand the rational. It just, the perception does not look right here.
I wasn't even involved in the meeting before the meeting, but the meeting before the meeting came up with the central.
Who does the score? I mean, does
Well,
the
the
staff
chair
do it?
generally.
Yeah, staff does the scoring.
You know, provides a recommendation on the scoring for.
I've never replied. I was the chair for 2 years. They never asked me to provide the chair
Of the subcommittee.
Oh, okay.
Subcommittee.
Okay.
So this year, yeah, so I've done that before, you know, this year was Tom Head, Tom.
Yep.
I think frankly, Tom talked to Scott and a few others, and they came up with a recommendation
Yeah.
that brought it to the committee.
Okay.
Discussion, I think, again, I think we can always, and that's why the takeaway from those, we can always try to improve and look at.
You all know me well enough. I'm going to speak up when I see something that doesn't stick out.
And that's fine. This is great discussion.
Right.
You know, this is exactly the.
Yeah, I never noticed that about you, Joe.
Stop it, Tom.
No, I have no problem.
I understand.
I think we need to have that discussion, but I think, again,
So-
that's-
If I could jump in here for a second, and Bob, Mayor, I served on the committee. I listened to the presentations. And Joe, candidly, I never have been, way back when I was on the committee, been extremely comfortable with the scoring process. Not for any reason except for that I think it skews different projects in different directions and gives people a false sense of, okay, this score is so lopsided that, and it gives you the opportunity to make the exact same argument you're making. And I hear you, but I don't necessarily put near as much weight on that scoring system in making arguments about projects. I just haven't. I guess another example I'm making, Joe, you already mentioned it, like the Northeast 23rd or Eastern Boulevard project. That project, I pushed strong on that project. It was a priority for Polk County, but frankly, it's probably more of has more of an impact on Des Moines and Pleasant Hill than it does Polk County, long term for your growth. So
Yeah, I agree.
So I think you got to consider all those things. And having said that, I hear what you're saying. I think what we talked about during the process was that we need to take a look at the scoring system itself. And I think Zach even acknowledged, yeah, we'll probably bring the group back together and try to figure out how that looks. But anyway, I hear what you're saying. I don't necessarily agree with the weight on the scoring.
And I was just going to say, I'm also a member of the committee and also had a question about the scoring. And what I asked is that somehow it be very transparent if a question is asked, if there's some kind of a documentation of how did staff come up with the recommendation, why is it
Sure.
not exactly correlating with
That would be
with the
helpful.
scoring, and it would be helpful for the subcommittee to have that before we have the discussion. And just to have everything on record, because it does, if you're thinking that scoring is the only thing, this did look really out of whack.
Yeah.
But there was more to it that's not really applied. So I just asked that be documented so that there's any kind of question like that, everybody remembers, how it was arrived at.
That would be very helpful. I think that as all of us are elected officials, we have to explain why funding's going to certain projects. And when you look at it, it just doesn't make much sense. And that's my point. As far as Hickman Road, that's not what this is about. So, we've got to be able to explain, hey, you scored 99 and you got no money. And we have to be able to explain that. So I understand it would be helpful to have some type of details like that. We'll move on. I will move item 6.
All right. Motion by Gatto, second by Mark. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Same sign. Any abstentions? Motion carries. All right. Thank you for the discussion.
I did first and second again.
I had first, Mark had second.
All right, item 7 is a report and vote on the federal fiscal year 2026 surface transportation block grant set aside program funding recommendation. Espen.
Thank you. We have full application for our TAP program, this application cycle. We did meet Des Moines, West Des Moines. They were all trails projects. All scored very well. Because we got the additional funding this year, we were able to award them all projects that applied. We just want to get 4 projects have received funding from town dollars.
Speak louder.
Yeah.
And maybe step over this.
So with that, we recommend approval for these 4 projects.
We'll move approval.
Second.
Legato, second by Weaver. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Same sign. Any abstentions? Motion carried. Thank you. Item 8 is a report and vote on the priority project list for the Greater Moines Partnership DC trip. Zach?
Yes, so we've been working on this list probably for the last 4 or 5 months, working with communities to update the list. I think we probably presented a draft form of this list in one form or another several times over the last couple of months. So I think everybody's pretty familiar with it. We did take it to the funding subcommittee at their meeting in February, and they reviewed it. The only real change they made to the list at that time was they wanted to add the Purple Heart Highway project to the list. So we did add that in there. Otherwise, it stayed the same from the last time we saw it. I would note that the list on page 15, anything in red is things that were changed over last year's list. In a lot of cases, it was just updating project descriptions or the project cost. There are a few instances where a city added a whole new project. But that's all accounted for in that table. I'd be happy to take any questions you have about the projects that are recommended to go on the DC trip list. Otherwise, it's before you for your approval. The one note I would make is that this list is separate from the community funded projects, the earmarked projects that will be being submitted here over the next month or so. Now, there's some of these projects might be ones that communities decide to submit, but this list is not. It's not that list. They're 2 separate things.
So a couple things with the Purple Heart Highway, I think it's important, the communities that it has, and Ruth and I have talked about this, we need shovel-ready sites. You know, we talked about that at the DOT. I mean, that's an important part of getting it redesignated.
Yeah, and we're working to define it with the partnership and the communities along there to define where those sites are along the corridor.
Okay. And then just a point of clarification, 7 and 8 is the city of Indianola. Are they're just not a voting member of the MPO, but they contribute to assessments to us here?
No, they're not a voting member. They don't, but they do go on the partnership trip. They did want to submit projects to it. Again, I think we touched briefly on this maybe back in February and discussed whether or not the committee wanted to allow them to keep their projects on the list. And at the time, everybody seemed fine with allowing them to put them.
Okay. So you don't have to, I mean, all of us pay an assessment, all of our communities pay an assessment. And that's that's one of the benefits that we use the MPO as one of these priority lists. But, we have a non-voting member that doesn't pay any assessment. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
And so they get to benefit everything that all of us get to do. And that, I never had that
I don't
discussion.
remember hearing that conversation.
I don't remember ever having that conversation, because that's another thing that stuck out to me on this agenda. It was just like, unless they had decided to join us and be a part of the MPL, but I mean, I have a problem with that.
Well, they're not asking for funding subcommittee money for it. They're just presenting it as
A
a set of
priority.
block priorities. I mean, I see your argument. I'm just trying to sort out what's an actual benefit of the MPO versus what's courtesy to an associate member. I say if they're asking for money, we got a line to draw. I mean, from us, but.
Well, I mean, we're putting it in with,
Yeah.
other community projects that, I mean, I think all of us have a,
They'll have to filter through this. They're not going to give money to every project. So
right, but I mean,
have to prioritize it.
it's-
So
I don't know.
that's within the queue.
I don't remember having that discussion that we said that was okay. I apologize. Maybe I wasn't at that meeting, but I've been
I know.
I've been pretty much in every meeting the last 2 years.
I don't know if we've ever had that discussion.
Well, he said that we did.
Did it?
I recall having that discussion.
Well, you had a discussion with me. because I saw the list and I had the same question.
Oh, okay.
And maybe that's what I'm remembering.
We never had this discussion as a policy discussion or as an executive discussion. I don't remember that. I definitely don't remember ever. I think I skipped one policy meeting when I was at it. No, we didn't have it in March, but I don't know if I was on the March exec. Yeah, I did the March executive meeting. So I don't remember having that.
Staff didn't feel comfortable unilaterally deciding not to allow them to put it on the list.
Is this something we should take to the policy and have a conversation with policy?
Well, it has to go to policy. And we have to make a recommendation to policy. It'll be on the agenda for the policy.
I would recommend that they either can pay their assessment as far as their community and be a part of the MPO, or you don't get any of the benefits from the MPO. And that includes putting priority list to go on a partnership trip. I mean, I don't understand why we would even consider that. That's not okay. They don't get the same benefits that all of us get if we're paid.
Are
That's
they
not fair.
associate because they're out of us?
But they're not.
They're not,
But they could be part, they can be part of the MPO.
If they wanted to, we would have to extend our planning period to include.
Well, I'm sure if they came to us and wanted to be part of it, that we would have that discussion and possibly extend it.
I think that's why they're doing it this way this year, is because we have not extended the planning area. That's why they're associate. So they just want in on the list. I get your argument. I'm just saying it's an awkward,
It's like,
it's awkward for them.
I don't even know why we even consider it. I mean, it's just not even, we're giving them a benefit that all of us put money in a pot and they do nothing and haven't ever asked to be, have they asked to be part of the MPO?
Not that I'm aware of.
They've had some discussions. It hasn't moved to the point where they've done a formal request to be a member. If we move the planning boundary, that could include allowing a number of communities into the MPO boundary. And so you have then more.
Same pot of money we get, or is it, will we get additional money if we move
You'd get a little more.
Is Indianola part of a different cog?
Part of CERC.
oh, so they're part of a cog?
No, they're part of Serpa because they have the bus, so they
So why don't they have that
have a loose
Serpa do that?
connection to, they have a loose connection to MPO through that. But I don't think they're part of another.
No, and I guess one wrinkle to consider here too is that partnership asks us to help identify the transportation projects for the partnership trip, so they're not identifying it. So I guess the question is it limited to just the MPO planning area, or should it cover the partnership planning area? And we typically don't advertise it to CERCLA, the area outside the immediate MPO either. But in this case, because Indianola is on our list and hear the information they send.
Because they are part of the partnership.
I don't know what you said. I didn't know what you said.
Partnership serves 10 counties, like,
Yeah.
so what we're dealing with here are very different political boundaries that overlap.
And we've just, to my knowledge, haven't had that conversation really. What are we doing this for? Is it for our members only, or for the partnership on their behalf with their members? What do we do?
Well, this is MPO / Greater Des Moines Partnership Priority List.
Yeah.
It's not Greater Des Moines Partnership Priority List. This is the MPO. So, I mean, MPO is members that pay.
Can you ask to look at and say, partnership?
I mean, I don't even know where South K Street and Hillcrest Avenue is. Is that their main roads in there?
Would it be possible to, if you took Indianola off this list, communicate with the partnership saying, okay, here's the MPO's priority transportation projects for its members. In addition, the partnership is more than welcome to add Indianola to their partnership
Yeah,
priority list so that there's a partnership agenda.
Let them add it instead of the MPO.
yeah, it shouldn't be MPO / I mean, partnership wants to have their own priority list without MPO. I mean, yeah, they're a member of the partnership, but they're not a member of us.
Great point. You want to make that motion?
Yeah, I'll make the motion to take 7 and 8, the city of Indianola's priorities off of the MPO, Greater Des Moines Partnership Priority Transportation Projects, and they can have it added to the partnership priority transportation and not the MPO. Does that make sense, Scott? He's muted. I think he said
Sorry,
yes.
it does. It makes sense.
Okay.
Second.
All right, motion by Gatto, second by Rivas. Any further discussion?
I just have one question. Do you think in the urban area boundary update with the new census that Indianola might be brought into the MPO? I know it'd be kind of hard to guess, but they're pretty far away.
Most likely not. They made some census changes. Skipping with Mike. That would affect.
Yeah, I don't know. That should be part of the partnership.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Any abstentions? Motion carries. All right, thank you.
That's how you really feel, Joe, next time.
Yeah, you guys.
Item 9.
I'm not shy.
Item
Make
9
all
is
kinds of
report
friends
on
today.
fiscal year 2019 to 2023 passenger transportation plan amendment.
It's a mouthful.
Yes.
Indeed. These were submitted by our staff recently, and really it's just a reallocation of some of their the funds from contracted demand response services to paratransit. And a lot of this has to do with the COVID-19 pandemic shifts that they've been making. Paratransit has been a higher priority and a need, and so these adjustments would be in fiscal year 21, 22, and 23. In your packet there, you'll see the shift, and at the bottom, the totals are the same. And just a reminder, this is not from MPO dollars, this is from FTA 5310 dollars that we just happened to program into our PTP and then added to it as well. And so this money is really for enhanced mobilities for seniors, and so that paratransit fits nicely under that umbrella. And I think, yeah, a bigger, that font did not do well, but you'll have this same image in your packet. Again, the total dollar amounts are the same at the bottom. They're just adjusting things to better serve the disabled population at this time. With that, I would take any questions you might have, and staff does recommend approval.
Okay, thank you, Allison. Any questions for Allison? Any comments? Or motion?
Second.
Second by Ruth. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Any abstentions? Motion carries. Item 10 is report and vote on federal fiscal year 2022-2025 transportation improvement program amendments. Ashley.
Thank you. We have 11 additional amendments by DART, but this is for our TIP, not PTP. I had amendments to bring to you back in February. We just have additional. There's 11 total. 2 projects are reducing funds, 6 are increasing funds, and then 3 new projects are being added. And I have a list that you could review, but otherwise I'll just go through these. We don't have to read every one. But if anyone has any questions about specific ones, please speak up. Otherwise, we'll just go through these. And with that, I would recommend approval.
Okay. Allison, any questions for Allison? Or ask yourself.
What is type of funding 5307 mean?
5307 is the FTA capital improvements funding source, so. Yeah, it's for urban capital improvements on transit programs. So again, it comes from FTA, not from any MPO. We just help program them.
Further discussion? Promotion.
Move approval.
By Weaver,
Second.
second by Rivas. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Any abstentions? Item 11 is a report on the notice of funds availability for hazard mitigation grant program.
You good? So we just wanted to make you aware, most of you are probably on the DLAM listserv. And this did come out through there, but we just wanted to reiterate again. There is hazard mitigation grant program funding out specifically for our December 2021 retro. a lot of this, again, because it was a windstorm, a lot of the projects that they're asking to be a priority do follow that. So safe room, warning sirens, things like that. There are some flood pieces in there, and all hazard mitigation projects that are in a hazard mitigation, approved hazard mitigation plan would be eligible, but these priorities do take a higher tier in the prioritization at the funding level. Again, any projects that you would submit do need to be in the hazard mitigation plan. Myself or AJ or Cameron over at emergency management can help you walk through that process. It's very easy to do. And with a lot of, as with most of the FEMA dollars, it is a 75% federal cost share, and then 25% is split between the state and local being the 15. It is a long application period, so it runs all the way through the end of this year. So if you're thinking about projects and want to develop those and then get them into the plan, there's plenty of time to do so, as they're not due until almost Christmas. So we have a couple seasons to go. So with that, we just want to make you aware and offer our support if any of your communities need help coming up with projects and getting them into the plans. I would say just for Carlisle and Norwalk, so you also are eligible in this, but you have to go through the Warren County plan instead of the Polk County plan, since most of your cities lie within that. So with that, we just want to make you aware. I'd be happy to take any questions you might have this time.
All right, thank you, Allison. Any questions?
We know how much funding they're gonna have for this program?
I didn't see a total yet, and I was gonna actually check. I'll check. And see if I have that total anywhere. They usually don't put it in the NOFA, but I might have it in an email somewhere. And I did see yesterday there was a publication about some FEMA dollars having a higher federal percentage from, I think it was like January 1, 2020 to December 31st, 2021. So this cost sharing could have changed too. And I'm not sure if it's based on when the declaration was done or when the actual incident was, but I'll clarify those real quick and have that ready for you at policy
And
next week.
will those, because it's coming from FEMA, will that have kind of the typical FEMA restrictions around them? Okay. And when will that start dispersing?
So usually, the application lead time is quite a while. I would say that the dispersal would probably come late spring in 2020. The applications, and then they'll review at FEMA Region 7, and then make the announcements. And usually, because we're a smaller region, we're a little bit quicker, a little bit more agile, but federal government. So, any other questions? And I can have those, I can find out if there were any changes with the numbers and see if I do have a total for you and have those ready for policy.
Great. Thank you, Allison.
Yep.
All right, item 12 is a report of the safe streets and roads for all grant program. Bill?
Thank you. This is one of the new programs that's coming out after the infrastructure bill was passed. As it says there on the screen in your packet, it's available for projects that really get towards reducing injuries and Vision Zero type of planning work. So the funding can be used either to create or either develop a Vision Zero plan if you don't have one already, or a safety action plan as they're calling it there, or to kind of implement the projects that are already in an existing plan. So something that we're encouraging the communities to take a look at, because I know some of those that's of interest. I know Moines working on one now. Some of the other communities have expressed interest in that. So this would be a good funding opportunity to help implement some of those projects. The full NOFA will be released in May. So this is just a heads up that these are coming out. And one thing that, in case I forget to mention it later, there's a lot of new programs coming out here. So we're going to do our best to put items like this on the agenda. So just to keep the communities aware of all the different projects, project funding, federal funding programs that are coming out for the next several months.
So is it higher crash site areas would be part of this program?
Yeah, you want it. Yeah, that would be one area, and they'd have to be consistent with whatever plan the community has. So if you don't have a plan, the first step would be this
Like,
funds to be used to.
I mean, we have East 14th that we're working on a plan with the state and some of
But
the.
in theory, your Vision Zero plan or your action plan would identify those high crash areas, and then this could be used to fund those and fix those.
So Dylan, it also mentions creating safe routes to school. How does that compete with our normal safe routes to school?
So this would be a different program, but it would just help supplement those funds.
Can you do both?
Yeah, you can do it. The funds would just want to make sure that there's not, that one project couldn't have beyond the 80% federal funds, that you could get funding from this and funding from the fund.
It could combine up to 80%.
These more pedestrian accommodation type stuff?
I don't know if it gets into that specifics in the information we have, but the NOFA will get into that.
So it's not just walkability and multimodal. This is, I mean, it's actually vehicle high crash sites that this
Yeah,
can be used for.
Like I said, I don't know if we know all the particulars of that, but the information we get next month will spell out.
These funds are gonna be coming, so they don't flow down through IDOT. They awarded by the USDOT.
What about USDOT? They'd be programs similar to other funding programs, so like the TIP and our work program that they're planning funds, but so the DOT gets involved a little bit, yeah, they'd be direct to.
So would we have a separate committee that would be set up to do this type of funding, and how much are we talking?
No, because these would go directly, this would be direct applications that communities would make to USDOT.
We don't think.
Oh, it's not gonna go through the MPO. Okay.
That's why I was.
So can our MIPA person help with these? Help communities with these?
Potentially, but because they're in the MPO or, you know, their DOT transportation funds, it'd be more of an MPO thing than a MIPA thing.
Okay.
Great, good information. Any other questions on that? Item 13 is report on the fiscal year 23 community project funding guidelines. Bill?
Yes, another funding opportunity, and Zach alluded to this earlier, is that there's another round of community project funding, but what we've traditionally referred to as earmarks, that is open now, and the deadline is coming up pretty soon. It's April 18th. So we've sent some information out to the communities, both tech and policy members, a couple of times. If you go to Representative Axton's website, there's more information on how to apply. There's links to the application, and this is also in the agenda packet. But just some highlights. She can only, each congressional member, but in our area, Congresswoman Axton can only submit 15 projects that she receives forward to the Appropriations Committee for consideration. That doesn't mean that all 15 of those projects will be funded either. She's just limited to 15 projects. That's up from 10 last year, so a little bit better. Last year, we just got news of this when the appropriations bill was passed late last month. 3 projects from our area made it into that list of 10. So just to give you a sense of scale there, and that's not just transportation projects, that's across all the various federal agencies that can give money to this. Projects need to have, they need to be in the TIP, and that's a pretty easy thing. We can put them in there as illustrative projects right now, so we don't have to go through the full amendment procedures, but ultimately they'll have to be in the TIP. They don't have to necessarily be in there to apply, but we're highly encouraged to have those be in there already in the TIP because they want to have shovel-ready projects. It's just 1 year funding only, so they need to be able to get the funding and get the projects completed here pretty quickly. Applications, like I said, are due next week. If you need letters of support, we're here to help and help with anything else we can do too, but want to make sure you're aware of this opportunity.
If you resubmit a project, you just have to hit resend and then have to go through updates.
Yeah, I don't know if the project application has changed significantly. I guess that'd be the one thing I'm not sure of. We didn't have to fill out the applications ourselves, so I don't know what all the questions they asked.
Thank you. Item 14 is a report on the Purple Highway.
As mentioned earlier, the Purple Heart Highway is one of the priority projects in the DC trip this year. And there's not any major updates for you today. The DOT continues with this process of meeting with stakeholders. The MPO has continued to assist in facilitating those. The last ones were with the partnership, economic development staff themselves, as well as with the city of West Des Moines. We've also done Norwalk, Carlisle as well. The other thing that's happening concurrently as the DOT wraps up its stakeholder outreach is MPO staff are coordinating with partnership staff. As Zach mentioned earlier, we're identifying developable land along that corridor, and we think it's important to work closely with the economic development people on that because they need to be the ones to help define what those parameters are. We want to be very careful with any numbers that we put out there. So we're going through the process of discovery right now, and once we have that discovery, we'll know what we'll have, and then we'll put it into some sort of product. At the minimum, we anticipate being able to communicate that with our congressional delegation on the DC trip. And our hope is that with the DOT, that they would be able to share preliminary findings with our congressional delegation and ask them about next steps.
So Andy, how's the discussion gone with Farm Bureau and some of the ag? Not, you know, they haven't given you an update. Stu
Stu
hasn't.
Anderson and
Yep.
Mitch Dillon. I think, like you said, MPO staff is black as well. I don't know if that's.
So MPO staff has been engaged with the meetings with the communities along the corridor. They've met separately with the agricultural community.
Can you ask Stu just to get us an update of how some of those discussions have gone, and have they been productive, or have they just been, you know, we're not doing this, we don't trust the feds to, because that was one of their big things, you know, it was the weight. And if, you know, if they feel like they have more influence in the state to keep it, you know, to be able to go over the weight in certain times of the year, and if it goes to the feds, they don't feel like that they would have that. And I've just wondered if some of that discussion has been kind of leveled off, or are they still at that standoff point where it's like, we don't want to do this because of that.
I'm assuming that's all those kind of information are being documented, but maybe before that.
Maybe you can ask, just have a conversation with Stu. I'm sure that he can give us a.
And I can speak to that a little bit.
Okay.
As mentioned, we were not in the room for these discussions. However, this topic comes up in all the discussions with the communities. And what Stu and Mitch communicated during those meetings was that the primary hesitation is that trust issue.
Yeah.
And the thought process being, if this is something that the feds can give, it's something that the feds can take away. Stu and Mitch, at least, they don't see that as a real issue. Well, it could be a perceived issue. And they just look at the track record of all the exemptions that have been given. None have been clawed back. So they don't see it as a real issue, but they do recognize it as a perception issue. The weight issue and the slow moving vehicle issues are the primary issues. And I think what their hope, or the hope for the advocates behind this, is that they come to a neutral position as long as their operations remain the same.
I think it's the weight, the slow moving, I think we can get around. I think we can come up with some type of.
Yes.
Now, you mentioned the exemptions, just off, I don't know if you two off the top of your head can say, how long have some of those exemptions been in place?
Decades.
Yeah. Long time.
Yeah.
And some of them in the last couple of years.
Gunnar, do you have any feel for how many more of these stakeholder meetings, especially with communities, have to take place? Because I know Norwalk, this really hasn't changed since Norwalk had its meetings in last fall. And they were going to go from Norwalk to Pleasant Hill, but that hasn't happened yet. So how, I mean, it's now April. I think that maybe we could move a little bit faster.
So to recap, it's a DOT process.
Uh-huh.
We're trying to be helpful as much as possible.
They're very
I was
nimble, aren't they,
wondering if
Andy?
DOT has given you any input on
And we've been trying to set dates to discuss talking points in DC with the hopes that we will speed things along. I will say that when we were meeting with West Des Moines, this is 2-3 weeks ago now, they indicated that they wanted to speak with some of the states that had recently had exemptions made as a way of understanding the process that they used.
Mhm.
And it was my understanding that those were kind of the last pieces being buttoned up. And what was communicated to us last month was that they should have preliminary findings by the DC trip.
because it
So we've had
was
all the
like by
stakeholder
February,
meetings.
March. So,
Sorry, what was your question?
well, I thought that when we had the meeting in Norwalk, they would hopefully in like February or March, they would have those preliminary findings, and we kind of missed that.
And this is the city of West Des Moines?
We had a meeting with the city of West Des Moines. I think it was just last month.
Is that what we're talking about?
I think those were the last
Or-
meetings.
I'm talking about the DOT meeting with all of the communities. So Pleasant Hill was still outstanding.
Okay.
Pleasant Hill has been held.
It
I
has
was
been
not
held.
at that one personally, but I know that was held.
All right. That's great. I just didn't see it on the list, and to me, the list haven't changed from the last time.
That's my fault,
Okay,
my oversight.
great. Thank you.
But they did.
Thank you, Gunnar. Item 15 is a report on the water trails update time.
Yep, no, thank you. As you know, and I sent a couple emails about this. We had the special letting on March 29th. We received one bid from Riley United, a joint bid. That was just under $73 million. obviously higher than we wanted or hoped for. So that bid was rejected. We had to go through a bit of a formal process to do that. To get concurrence from the DOT and Federal Highway, which they both concurred with. Well, once they did that, we were allowed to reach out to the contractor team and ask them if we could have a meeting to talk about the bid and discuss reasons for where their bid came in compared to where we thought it should come in at. That meeting has been set up for next week, or excuse me, the 25th of April, where some folks will come in from the contractor side, and we'll have a couple folks there as well. And we'll kind of walk through the bid documents. As I mentioned in the email, there's a few ideas on what we may be able to do differently. On the screen there, one of them is, instead of bidding it all as one big package, separated out into the three-part projects plus the dam modification project. We think that might get some more bidders on it that didn't want to take on the whole thing or be part of a team that was doing the whole thing. Federal Highway wasn't real agreeable to that. Initially, we asked to do that from the get-go, but now they're more open to that idea. So we'll see how that plays out. Also looking at some of the construction techniques that are in the bid documents compared to what we could possibly do, as well as some of the material sources. Some of the materials that are spec'd are coming from Minnesota. It would be far cheaper to get them locally, or just maybe a different color. So we'll have to see how that goes. There's several other items like that we can look at as we go forward.
So the rocks, Todd?
Yeah, some of the rocks. They were looking for a certain color, and the places you can get them are Minnesota and I believe North Dakota. And having fuel costs over 3 years of hauling tons of rock, they're putting in a pretty big inflation factor to cover the fuel costs over that length of time. So we would probably save a tremendous amount of money if we could source the rocks locally that might be a little different color. Maybe we can use the bulk of the rock locally, and if we need to face something, we get some from Minnesota or wherever to face some of the rock, to put that outer layer on. So it's things like that we're going to talk about, some different ways of going about constructing the project instead of completely dewatering everything, allowing some of the work to be done where there is some water in the construction area, but it's not completely dewatered. So we'll see how those discussions go and how we work with our partners at the DOT and Federal Highway. So we'll know more after the April 25th meeting, also when we'll want to try to rebid this project.
So Todd, we paid consultants to give us the engineering estimate, correct?
The MPO did not pay them, but
They're not the MPO, but Icon Water Trails, we paid, right? And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know how it's going to become something that, and we had this discussion yesterday. And I hope that we're being transparent with all communities. And I think that we all need to go back and talk to our communities, that we need to be transparent about this whole thing. This is a project, even when you split it up, it's way over the engineering estimate. And we need to be cautious about how this is presented going forward to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm not sure how you get it 100%. Well, I mean, it's well over the engineering estimate.
Yeah.
Engineering estimate is like 39 million.
Right.
And that came in at 73 million. So there's just.
Even when you
no
split it up
down.
and you try to get more, the problem that we're facing is there's so much work out there. And
yeah, that's part of it.
And it's work that people are familiar with,
Yep.
It's roads, it's bridges, it's dirt work. it's not something where they've got to go get custom rocks and they, these folks are going to put their name on the line to do this project and make sure that it's done in a timely fashion, because we're under the gun with this, with the federal highway and the DOT grants. It's a challenge for them to say, okay, we're going to put all of our marbles in this basket when we've got so much work.
Yeah.
That's the problem that we're running into. And
Right.
I don't know how we're going to change that at this point.
Yeah, that's definitely an issue.
The other challenge that we talked about at the board meeting that Joe and I were at was that yes, Federal Highway's allowing us to split it up into 4 separate bids, but they have to be all accepted collectively. You can't kind of just do 1 or 2. All 4 have to be agreed to, or it doesn't move forward.
Yeah, that's what Paul LaFleur has stated to the point. Talking with the DOT, they've said they've done projects, not a water trails project, but a build or Tiger project where they have done them as separate bids at separate times. So I think there's some opportunity there. We'll see if that happens or not, but it's certainly something the DOT wants to discuss more with the Federal Highway. And
yeah, we've talked to our engineers with those Tiger grants and things like that. The project, and Ted is absolutely correct. We might be able to split it up, but everything that we were granted, that award of 25 million, that all has to be completed by a certain amount of time. It doesn't matter if we split it up 4 different ways, and they're going to have to agree upon it. But we're still going to have to get contractors to do the work, all work together and get it completed all at the same time. And now you're not talking about one contractor. Now you're going to talk about 4 different ones that are going to sub out a lot of the different things. And so now I don't know if that's a better way to do it or actually more,
I think
dangerous way to do it.
I think the park projects are something that a lot of different contractors can get done and might bid on if they didn't have to bid with the dam modification project. And I think there's some contractors that are more interested in the bridge dam modification side of things than, I don't want to mess with this park stuff, so I'm not going to get involved in that.
I don't know if anyone's interested in doing those rocks and doing the in-water stuff.
Well,
That's just something that not a lot of people are familiar with. And that's the challenge we've got.
And that's why we want to talk about it. Can we modify how we're going about constructing that so it's more normal for the contractors than what we have right now? And still get
as the MPO and as the director of the MPO, it's not our responsibility. We paid a consultant to give us the engineering. It's their responsibility, Todd, to get us the number of what it's going to be and get it out and figure out how we're going to do it. You're not an engineer.
No, I'm not.
We're not engineers. We don't know what, that's problematic. And now we've got our nose stuck so far out there in the MPO that, you're saying you're going to do all these things. That's not your role.
I'm not saying I'm going to. The team is looking at how we can do this.
I get that. I'm very nervous, and I stated that I was very nervous at the last ICON meeting, and I'm going to state it publicly now. And I've been a cheerleader for this project all along, but I'm seeing pitfalls that I do not want the MPO to fall into. As we sit in this building and we got it finished and it's completed, yeah, we were successful with a grant. We don't want to fall on our face with the next one.
No, I certainly didn't want to that either. And so we're working as a team to figure out how we get to the finish line.
Well, we got some deadlines coming up, right? Like September 30th, the funds have to be allocated or the grant goes away, is my understanding. And so that means the updated RFPs for these 4 different projects have to go out by July in order just to meet that timeline, right? So
yeah, we have to have an expenditure by September 30th of some sort, mobilization most likely. So
bids don't go down in the summer.
So the
Right.
bid's gonna be higher.
Right.
broken in.
We've seen it all as elected officials, all of our engineering
That's what we
estimates.
talked about that at the icon.
Not much
We
higher.
have to have more realistic expectations on those bids, because there's just no way we're gonna get to 39 million. It ain't gonna happen.
No, no, we won't get there. It's gonna have to be a higher number. But hopefully it's
And
not
I-
as bad as what we got.
Yeah, and going back to member communities that have already participated in trying to hit them up for other funds, that's not gonna work either. I mean, we're all in for what we're all in. We've already went to our budget. We've already put it in our budgets. There's no way we're gonna be able to go back and say, hey, Urbandale, can we get another 150,000, or Des Moines, can we get 5 more million? That's not going to happen. And so I hope we're realistic with your team that ARPA funds aren't going to be available for this, and we're not going to go down that road. We are in for what we are in. And there's not one of my colleagues that would agree to do any more money for water trails until they see it going, people going down the river. And to that point, Center Street is the moneymaker. And now we're at a point where, how are we going to do that? Are we going to have to switch our focus to the Raccoon, where we don't know what the flow is to Raccoon all is, because that's where we get our water source, and we're all going to get a water source from it. So now we're going to, we're going to have the attraction go to the Raccoon. And there's so many unknowns, but the whole thing of this was eventually we'll get Center Street, and that will generate revenue to provide the maintenance and provide everything for this. If we don't get Center Street, it's never going to generate money. It's going to cost our taxpayers dollars. Let's just be honest. And that's what we need to be transparent about to all of our, as an elected official, we have to be transparent about that. So I just want to be clear, at least from our point of view. I don't know about the rest of your communities. I see a lot of people shaking their heads here because you're not an elected official. We've got to answer for this. This is a big project. We all love the project. We were all in on it, but we've got some issues, Todd, and I hope you go carry that water to
Oh,
the
yeah.
team. Thank you for the update.
Absolutely.
It is what it is, where we're at.
Okay, item 16 is a report on the Economic Development District.
This will be the last time you see this slide.
No way. We're almost to the end of it, man.
We are to the end of it. I can say we checked off all the phases. The support was there. We created the entity. We got the designation. And I can report today that the partnership program, which is the funding piece, has been approved. We received the grant notification this week. And we've also hired staff. I don't know if I need to go into depth on any of these. Partnership program, we received notice. Grassley's office was the first one to get to us. Membership is looking really healthy, 48 jurisdictions. The population of these collectively combined needs more than 80% of the population of the 7-county region. And while I don't have names on the slide here and won't share them here publicly, I will say that there are discussions with a couple of more jurisdictions that could bring that percentage up even higher. Update on the staffing, we received 3 applications, and I know that hiring and finding talent was one of the issues that we identified during the SES process. And we experienced that personally through this process. We interviewed 2 candidates. We had 1 finalist that was presented to a hiring committee of the board. They recommended approval, and the board approved of that I think it was just last week. So that offer was extended and accepted, and we will have a new employee, we believe, Monday, April 25th.
Are you gonna tell us who it is?
His name is Caleb Knutson, and he is currently a planner for the city of Marshalltown. We're also in process of transitioning to the full-time board of directors. As you all recall, we installed an interim board of directors for the launching phase. Now we're getting up into operations. We're going to have that board in position before the first full fiscal year. That first meeting is going to be on May 26th. We're also transitioning to create an executive committee that will help oversee the day-to-day operations. That's all I have for the update. Of course, I'd be happy to answer any additional questions that you might have.
Any questions? Item 17 is report on the transit facility. Is it done?
Is this the last time I'm gonna see this on there too, Zach?
We don't really have much to update you on since the last meeting. Again, we're working on closing out the RLG grant with the Iowa DOT loan, actually. But we're meeting with Iowa DOT today at 1:30 here at the facility. They're going to do a walkthrough. Once they've done the walkthrough, they'll be able to check that off and they'll be able to send us the retainage, $170,000 they held back through the process. So we're close to having the RLG funding closed out. We're also very close to having the build grant funds closed out as well. We have one more reimbursement request that we're waiting on from Des Moines Industrial. Once we get that, we'll submit it, and then we'll have a final performance report to submit to FRA. And then once we do that, we'll be closed out on the build grant. So the process moving forward, again, we're expecting to have that closeout happen here in April, May. Just as soon as that reimbursement can come through, and we can get that final report sent off to the FRA. And then they're going to get their formal certificate of occupancy from the city of Des Moines May, once they can get the landscaping installed on the site. So I hope all of you who were able to go on the tour enjoyed it, found it informational. I'm glad to be here to see the facility completed after all the years of work that we've put into this. And even more excited to start seeing a lot of activity happen inside the Square House and on the rail outside of it. So I'd be happy to take any questions, but that's all I have for an update on the transport.
I want to publicly thank Dart for lending us the vans today. It was courtesy of them.
I also like to thank Paul and Gabe for hosting our meeting today out there. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you. Then item 18 is the legislative update.
Yep, a quick update here, mostly on the federal side of things. After we met last time, since we've met last time, I should say, the appropriations bill was passed. This increased our funding, as Zach mentioned, with our SDBG funds. And it implemented a lot of new programs that were passed or that came about in the infrastructure bill late last year. Speaking of the infrastructure bill, as I noticed, there's a lot of guidelines, NOFAs and so forth coming out over the next weeks and months. So we'll be doing our best to keep you apprised of that. And then one final thing dealing with the COVID relief and ARPA funds. When that was passed, there were some ARPA funds that could be used for transportation, but it had pretty strict requirements on them. Last week, there was a bipartisan effort and bill coming out, hasn't come out yet, hasn't been passed, but it sounds like there's a deal reached that will come out here soon that would be for $10 billion in supplemental COVID funds, and it would relax those funds for infrastructure and transportation. And it sounds like it would have a cap that's greater of $10 million or 30% of the payments that go to the state or to the local government. It's a direct recipient of those funds. So still waiting to hear more details on that. It sounds like the House, these were Senate, bipartisan Senate committee that was supportive of it. Not sure on the House yet, but we'll keep you abreast of what happens there.
Item 19, report on upcoming events.
Just a few events that I'll bring to your attention. There's a age-friendly housing webinar coming up. I'm sorry, that was yesterday. We'll skip that slide.
Doesn't worry, I didn't know what the date was anyway, it didn't matter. You could have rattled it off and I wouldn't have known anything.
So April 26th, coming up, save the date for Beyond the Bus with Herda. Masto Conference on Growing Transportation Mobility for All coming up in July. And then also want to draw your attention to an MPO sponsored event coming up next week. The MPO has been a sponsor of the CRE breakfast that the Business Record puts on. In the past, has had about 400 attendees, usually a pretty good event. Talking with their staff, sounds like their events are starting to bring in a lot more people in person now. The 40 under 40 had like 700 people at it, we're told. So that event is coming up next week. Starts early at 7 o'clock with networking panel discussion at 7:30. And as a sponsor, we get a spotlight. And so Mayor Andewig will be speaking on behalf of the MPO. speaking to our investment. Share with you, this is actually the ad that we did in the business record for our sponsorship. And we're just choosing to highlight all the dollars that the MPO brings into the region. This is kind of an all collective number, including the awards that the MPO makes, outside contract or awards or grants that we've received, just to show the investment that we're making in the region. That's it for events, unless I can answer any questions.
All right, Gunner. Item 20 is vote on the policy committee agenda. Is there a motion?
Move it.
Motion by Gatto, second by Weaver. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Same sign. Any abstentions? That carries. Item 29, any other non-action items of interest? Hearing none, then we will have our next meeting then on May 18th. Any second?
Second.
Wait by Weaver. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? That's right. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.